it is always a personal satisfaction to be able to introduce Colonel Curtis Dall.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored today to have been asked to introduce a very distinguished patriot and an outstanding lady from the Lone Star State. I am especially pleased to have this opportunity because the Lone Star State and the spirit in that state has always meant a great deal to me. I remember reading in the annals of our family records that my thrice great uncle, Moses Austin, from the borders of Louisiana in December of 1820, rode a horse alone across what was then called the Rich Wastes to see if he could work out an understanding with the Mexican governor, then ensconced in San Antonio, Texas, to lead a band of some 200 Anglo-Saxons to start and what subsequently came to be known as the Lone Star State or Texas. The lady on my right comes from Longview, and you will hear from her some things that I feel are extremely important. We in Liberty Lobby, as Colonel Bunker just said, we do our best to further the efforts of constructive legislation aimed to benefit all of the American people. We further those bills which we feel are constructive, and we oppose those bills in the House and in the Senate which we do not feel is constructive to the American people. The lady on my right is engaged in an area which is extremely vital and extremely important, in that it strikes at the heart of the forces which are designed to confuse and degrade and in some cases debauch the minds of our youngsters as they are growing up. So I am particularly sensitive that if we have children in this country, young citizens in the making, that are growing up and are misinformed, then what chance have we got to have good legislation for the benefit of all? The chance is greatly reduced. Now in this country, knowledgeable people know that sinister internationalist forces own a great many of our forests. They own a great many of our lumber companies. They own a great many of our publishing companies. Now that's fairly significant because in the ownership, which is not alone directed for profit, but for control of the minds and the philosophy and the ideology of many of our children, it's extremely important because the publishing companies, by having the authors write books for them that they feel are suitable, with few exceptions of course, and by having teachers teach from textbooks certain lines of thought, and having the textbooks themselves portray certain lines of thought, you see in effect, ladies and gentlemen, that is a very effective and very well hidden bit of control over our overall ideology. All of us know that in our churches we have been infiltrated right across the board. We know that our money and our monetary policy has been vastly changed from which we started. We know that our armed forces are subjected to various forms of sly and subtle infiltration of an unpatriotic nature to change the fine spirit of our forefathers into something which is have to be forced into a no-win war. And then finally, but not least by any means, is the field of education. Education is a very wide and complex subject, and it has been debauched by the powerful forces of internationalism. So it gives me the greatest pleasure to present to you this morning this lady from Longview, Texas, a great patriot, Mrs. Mel F. Gabler.
Thank you, Colonel Dall, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be in the city of Boston and have an opportunity to speak to you. I thought this morning before I start to try to give you a little education, and I know many of you think, well, I know what's going on. I honestly believe until you have taken a good look at a textbook that your child has studied in school, I don't think you know what's really going on. And let me make it clear now, whether you have children or not, you are involved in education. Every child that passes through the schools in this great land of ours will be the future leaders in your communities, in your nation tomorrow. You wondering what's happening to them? I hope before I'm through today I can give you just a little bit of an idea of what's happening in this great land. I think you will be very shocked. I have never spoken to any organization, regardless of how informed they are, that really know what's going on. They only think they do, because this is the way my husband and I felt. I ran across this some years ago, and I thought it was so good, maybe to bring you on the 4th of July. I've read it many times. I spoke to a civic club a number of years ago, and I started using it. I think that you might appreciate it. Why fly the flag? The young man asked. Long ago, when it was young, well, it was different then. It was novel. It was the thing to do. But now the flag is old. Then the custom is long outmoded. The old man smiled and said, yes, my son, the flag is old now, but then it always has been old. Remember, it was Old Glory, way back there on Captain's Field, where Howard's men endowed it with the name of love. And it was old and tattered too the day it flew over Brooklyn's stubborn stand by Smallwood's bold command. It was older still, of course, at Fort McHenry, when, waving in the morning breeze, it inspired a hymn of noble destiny. Yes, son, that banner of beauty was even old when its stars and stripes were stitched with loving care by Betsy Ross. As old as men's hatred of tyranny, his yearning for freedom and his love of liberty won. As its origin indeed goes back to civilization's very dawn, but in its ageless beauty, it is still young, young enough to quicken the beat of a soldier's heart at its morning rising, and moisten the eyes with the sentiment of its vesper time descent, and to symbolize the sailor's love for the ship on which he sails. It is so beautiful in its lasting youth that men still would die to keep it from the dust. Yes, the flag is young enough to bear new stars and mark the new additions to the family of states. And at least to these old eyes, its youth takes on a new bloom as each nation emerges in a pattern after that for which it proudly stands. You need not fly the flag, for there is none to say you must. The choice is freely yours. That's what Old Glory means to me. The young man looked slowly at the dusty box, and he reached down his hand. He picked up the flag, and then he took it and hung it in its stand. And then, through tears in his eyes, he said, you know, I think I never saw that flag before. I don't know if that means something to you, but it does to me after reviewing textbooks for the many years in the great state of Texas. But what is used in Texas, let me make it very clear to you, it's in every state. We just happen to have in Texas a manner in which a citizen is given the right to object to a book on a state level. But I think, too, you ought to know one thing, that I am a housewife and a mother, and I'm very proud to be an MRS. You see, today there seems to be the trend that we want to be liberated from what? I can think of no better thing today or no better profession in life than that of a mother and a housewife. I happen to love my boys, and I'm proud to say that they're proud of me. And I'd like for you to meet the other half of my family, and without him I would be nothing. I'd like you to meet Mel. Mel, would you stand? And as I attempt to talk to you, when I refer to we, I refer to my husband and I. We decided some years ago that it was important to listen to our children. When our oldest son, who is now 27, he's a captain in the U.S. Army Medical Service Corps, and stationed until about 3 weeks ago in the field that he said next to Vietnam was the most dangerous battlefield in the world, and that's Washington, D.C. Jim enlisted 3 years ago in the Army. He is now a captain. He works directly under the Surgeon General. He's rather proud of standing up for his country. He always has. It's because of Jim that we're doing what we're doing today. The only qualifications I have really is a housewife and mother. Because I said the only thing that I have really, a little different than maybe some of the others, is that I have God and guts. And it really takes both of it. Because... And I think when I get through talking to you, you'll see that it takes real guts to fight the field of education. We were told repeatedly when we attempted to get better textbooks for our boys to study, they told us, you don't have a chance. But they didn't count on the Gablers. You see, we're not quitters. We don't believe in giving up. I always tell them, well, that's okay. If I lose this time, I'll be back next year, but I'll be better next year. This is what we've done for 11 years. In the state of Texas, the name Gabler is well known. Not because of the name, it's just because we happen to have something is called You Don't Quit. Do you know what they'd really like, the liberal would like for you to do today? The first place, when you appear at a hearing, what they want the most is for you to lose your temper. Don't ever give them that courtesy. Don't lose your temper. The dirtier they are to you, the sweeter you are to them. That hurts. The next thing is don't give up. We've repeatedly had other people that have attempted to go down to Austin, and when I speak, we do ours on the state level in the state of Texas. The law gives us this right. It's real cute. They say, well, Mrs. Gabler, you're always against something. I said, I have no other choice. The state of Texas only allows us to be against a book. We're not allowed to take up for a book. So you see, automatically I've taken them off guard. I said, I have no other choice. I have to be against the book. But to be able to appear on the state level in the state of Texas, you have to have done your homework. But I challenge you now, anytime you attempt to talk about textbooks, in fact, before you talk about anything, be sure you have done your homework. Another thing that is used repeatedly, and I don't have to tell you, if those of you who have had children and have dared to go up to school and to ask a teacher or the principal or the superintendent something about your child or your child's textbook, most of the things you receive is, oh, I so appreciate this. Have you read your child's book? First thing you do, well, I've read part of it. You've lost your case. Don't ever give them the courtesy to say that you've have read part of it. Say, yes, I've read the book, but before he can jump you with the next one, you turn around and say, well, sir, I'd like to ask you, have you read the book? Have you read all of it? Well, go back and read it again with an open mind, and you should see his face, because this is what you're told repeatedly. Because you see, the thing about it is, I have found through the years that the liberal does not have an open mind. It's a closed mind. But you're the one that has to have the open mind. Another thing that I have found in being pitted against the publisher and the representatives of the field of education, and don't kid yourself, they have sent their vice presidents down to Texas many times just against my husband and I. And I'm usually the one that has to go because my husband's business, he usually is not allowed to get off. Therefore, here's a lone woman in the state of Texas against the field of education. Well, it's not a very happy thought, but I do happen to know that one person scares them to death. You can make a difference, but you've got to bow your neck, and regardless of what they say to you, you've got to keep on fighting. They want you to quit. They think that you won't come back. But I proved to them. Now they say, well, automatically, I'll see you next year. I said, you'll probably see me before. "11 years ago, our oldest son, Jim, who is now 27, he was 16 years of age, was taking a course in American history in high school, which every student must take, or has been in the past. That will be changing. He came in from school about the middle of the year, and he said, "Say, Dad," said, "tell me something." Said, "Just what did the framers of the Constitution have in mind when they wrote the Constitution?" He said, "I don't want a long-winded answer. I want something short and to the point." And his dad told him, said, "I would say, Jim, just enough centralized government to keep a group of states and its people together, but leave the governing up to the states and its people." He said, "Boy, not in my book." Now remember, we had never looked at a textbook. We did not think we had to. And I think that we were probably like most of the parents that I have talked to through the years. He said, "Okay, I'll bring it home tomorrow and I'll show it to you." He brought his book home, and that was the first time we had ever looked at a textbook. And I honestly don't have to tell you I'm ashamed that I waited 11 years of my boy's school in his classroom before I ever took a look at the book that he was studying. And I think that you will find this today across this land. Most parents have never looked at what their children are being taught. He brought his book home, and in the history books that we have today, on the one page, usually on the left, it gives a portion of the Constitution, and on the right, it attempts to explain to that student that portion of the Constitution. And all the way through this particular chapter on the Constitution, it gave the rights the state assumed, the federal government, and the rights that the powers the states gave up to the federal government. But it never got around to telling the student any rights that the states retained. He knew the book was wrong. You heard so often, "out of the mouth of babes." Well, we happen to be listening to our children. This is why we're today doing what we're doing. I'm not a public speaker. I'm a housewife and mother, and I'm proud of it. I never intended to go out and speak, because I'll be honest with you, every time I think of getting out for somebody, I think, "Oh, no, I couldn't." I came up, looked in the room yesterday, and I said, "Oh, Mel, you wouldn't make me do that, would you?" But I have found this, that I feel the Lord gives everybody a talent, and at least one. Many of you have many talents. Most of you do not use the talent that you have. I'm convinced in my heart that you can do anything that you do if you do it to the honor of God and not for your own glory. We found it when Jim brought this up to our attention, that there was an opportunity for the parents to do something about it on the state level. Now, it's been slow and it's been hard, and at oft times it's been heartbreaking. But we also found out that you can make a difference. We found out that one parent taking an interest can absolutely shake up the whole field of education. I happen to know that NEA has even come into Texas to take a better look at what's going on. The Commissioner of Education told me about 4 years ago, said, "Mrs. Gabler, there's one thing I can give you credit for. You've certainly made textbooks known in Texas." The Commissioner of Education, at times, I think he'll have a nervous breakdown when he sees me. But I keep going back, because I always tell them, one of these days I'll win, but I'll do it within the law. But I expect you to do the same thing. This is exactly the way we work. We stay within their rules that they operate. But you see, the rules are always the opposite direction. The rules are, they want us to toe every line. We cannot say anything we have not turned in writing. In the state of Texas, we must file a bill of particulars. In this bill of particulars, we must lay out in page, line, paragraph, and then why we object to it. We cannot say anything we have not turned in writing. And yet the publisher has had no holds barred. 2 years ago, I informed the State Board of Education that the same rules were going to apply for the publisher that it applies to me. I said I was getting tired of fighting a one-handed battle. I said always, repeatedly, I come as though I had both hands tied behind me and you like to gag me too. I said I'm tired of it. I said they're my children and it's my money. I have a right, and you have a right as a parent to know what your children are being taught. It's just the thing about it is you don't take that right. I think it's time we take the right. If every parent in this great land had said, no, we're not going to have it, 10 years ago we'd have had a different trend in education. I still think there is hope, but the parents must bow their neck and say, I've had it. You'd be surprised how far they'll back up. Now, they don't stay back long, because, see, you quit fighting and they haven't given up. This is where we lose. You think, well, I've won this battle, as you've heard on some of the speakers on sex education, but just remember they'll come back another way. Don't give up. And don't think because you've won this skirmish that they've given up their battle. They haven't. They don't intend to. I found something very interesting a number of years ago. Our Shreveport paper, we live 56 miles from Shreveport, Louisiana. The Shreveport Journal, which is a very good newspaper, I happen to know the editor of the paper, he republished an article that was written 39 years ago. This was taken from the Monroe Evening News from Monroe, Michigan, and it was reprinted in the Shreveport Journal in January 1970. And the title was Not That. And here was his text, and Not That referred to early brainwashing in this country. This editor could not believe that the government in Washington would use our schools to remold this nation, but it did and is still doing it. And this is the quote that disturbed the editor so much. It said the source of the editor's disbelief was revealed in a speech given by Louis P. Alber. He was the chief of the Speakers Division of the NRA, the National Recovery Act, which is now the NEA. And here is his quote: "The rugged individualism of Americanism must go, because it is contrary to the purpose of the New Deal and the NRA, which is remaking America. Russia and Germany are attempting to compel a new order by means typical of their nationalism, which is compulsion. The United States will do it by moral persuasion. Of course, we expect some opposition, but the principles of the New Deal must be carried to the youth of this nation. We expect to accomplish by education what the dictators of Europe are seeking to do by compulsion and force. The schools are the place to reach the future builders of this nation, and the taxpayers, whether they like it or not, are to pay for having their children converted to these policies." That is the quote that this man gave. He was disturbed. Then you ask, well, just what are my children learning? Let me give you just briefly in the time that I have. I said I had so many different books, I really didn't know where to start today, because I think it's all disturbing, and you hit in every direction. Yes, and even homemaking. I have boys, and having boys, I thought, well, I don't have to worry about homemaking. Boy, was I in for a surprise. Take a good look at homemaking. Homemaking was not like when you had homemaking in school, or at least it's not the book that I used when I was going to school, and I'm not really that old. I keep telling myself. The trend today is to play up the faults of our great men and play down their great deeds. When you think of that, then you can see what's happening to this great nation. Studying from the books today, I can understand why a young person today has no use for America. Why should you? If you could read what they're reading in the books today, you would absolutely want to spit on the flag along with everybody else, except you happen to know better. Our boys knew better. This is why they're different men today, and this makes the difference. In one of the new history books today that fortunately we were successful in keeping off the adoption list in the state of Texas. This is the first time I actually cried. I couldn't believe that this book would be removed from the list. When we first started reviewing textbooks in 1960, I used the 1960 edition of A History of a Free People to show in my speeches what had happened to history. I wrote out 2 of the books, and then it came along 1970, and you'd think, well, 1970, they surely could find something a little different. Let me give you a little idea of what's in this book. In terms of leadership, Washington was undoubtedly the greatest American asset, even though he lost more battles than he won. He sometimes annoyed men by his stiff manner and by a tendency to talk and write as though all were lost. This is the father of our great country. He was accused of trying to make himself king and of selling out to Great Britain. When he left office, the leading newspaper exulted, "If ever there was a period of rejoicing, this is the moment. Every heart in unison with the freedom and happiness of the people ought to beat high with exultation that the name of Washington from this day ceases to give a currency to political inequity and legalize corruption." They even relegated him to a common pickpocket. I think today that most people are absolutely amazed that this could be written in a history book in this great country. You've got real news until you take a good look. The way I believe that we were effective in getting this book removed, in our bill of particulars, we took our pages and we decided, I said, Mel, we've got to do something different. You know, every year you've got to outsmart the other side, and they have the money. We just have the hard work. But also they underestimate the power of God. We took an old 1914 book by the same company, and that was not the same authors, but it was the same company. So we went back to one of their old history books 50 years ago, about 50 years ago, 1918, an American history book by the same company. And we took this on George Washington. This was just some of the minor points that we took. This was one of the points. In 1914, our children were studying. No other American has won the universal love of the people as he did. He was an avowed Christian, and his deep religious conviction formed the basis of his character and guided his daily life. We now know that he was a man, a real human being, with a robust good sense and with much claim to genius, but also with the many faults and limitations of other men, possessed of a strong temper, but he kept it under masterly control. His greatness consisted for the most part in his lofty motives and his extraordinary sound judgment and his unlimited courage when standing for the principle that he believed to be right. That was found in a 1918 edition of the History of the United States of America by Macmillan, 1914. Let me pause here and ask you one thing. Buy all of the old histories that you can get your hands on. There will be a time, and there's fast becoming that you will soon forget what really happened in this great country. And I kid you not, they're burning them very fast. I hope to see the day that there will be somebody who will be able to write and put up the money for taking the old history books with the copyright date gone, and once again take the great portions of history out of this and compile it in a book, at least for our Christian schools and private schools to have. This can be done. This is the only way that many of our children will ever have the privilege of knowing what it's really like to live in America, what it's really like to have men that stood for something. Because you see, when you play up the faults and play down their great deeds, there's very little left for the young person to be proud of. I know on many of the talk shows, and I'm on quite a few of them, it's quite interesting. One of them said, "Mrs. Gabler, you didn't answer my question. I wanted to know what you thought of George Washington's bank account." I said, "Sir, I did not think that deserved an answer." This rather puts him down real nice, because it didn't deserve an answer. I said, "Well, if I were writing something about you, how would you like for me to write about your bank account?" I said his bank account had nothing to do with his part of history. Do you think bank account has anything to do with George Washington's part of history? After all, who knows what his bank account was? You know, the trend today in history is write what they might have done, what they might have said, not what they said. We took our bill of particulars and went through it. And we put what the new book said, and on the other side put what the old book said, by the same company. Repeatedly we asked, did history change, or didn't your authors change history? We proved that the authors changed history. In the spring of 1962, This Week magazine conducted a study which took several famous sayings from great episodes in American history and then searched for them, first in 14 old text, that is, before the 1920s. And then they took the 45 new history books. This is those after the 1920s. I think the results will startle you. First was Nathan Hale's famous speech from the gallows, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." This appeared in 11 of the 14 old texts and only 1 of the 45 new. Next was John Paul Jones' stirring challenge, "I have not yet begun to fight." It was in 9 of the 14 old books and in none of the new. Another case was Captain James Lawrence. Don't give up the ship. It was in 13 of the 14 old text and only 2 of the 45 new. Or finally, Patrick Henry's great saying, the very battle cry of American independence, "Give me liberty or give me death." This appeared in 12 of the 14 earlier texts and only 2 of the 45 new. What has happened to history? It doesn't take long to see. There is something, too, I'd like to ask you. How many of you have ever heard of James Logan? Very few people have ever heard it. It was real interesting. We were reviewing 8th grade history books a number of years ago, and I ran across a neat little book. And it was a rather strange book because this little 8th grade history book had names that we had never heard of. We couldn't even find them in any of the research material, and we have vast research material. In fact, I think we now have 5 sets of old encyclopedias, plus histories. You wouldn't believe it. If you came to my house, I told my husband the other day, I said, I can't even vacuum under my bed. I've got textbooks under the bed. You see, every time we have any time, we read a textbook. I'd love to one time read a book for enjoyment, but I have to read a book because I have to. Because you see, this last year alone, we read 58 books. There were over 400 to read. And we would have liked to have read all of them, but 2 people can only do too much, just so much. Therefore, we have books everywhere. We started digging, and we searched everywhere. We couldn't find James Logan. But yet this little book found 9.5 pages for them. You know who he was? He was William Penn's secretary. William Penn received 1 page. You wonder what's happening to history? See what they've done. They've taken little men and made them great. They've taken great men and made them small. And when we got through with this book, we were quite warped in our thinking. We were wondering if maybe we had missed something that maybe we should have known. This is the trend of writing textbooks today. They intend to teach your child nothing. I couldn't understand a number of years ago. Our boys were quite intelligent, and they were interested in getting an education. Our 2 older sons hold master's degrees in computer science. One, as I told you, was a captain in the Medical Service Corps. The other son is teaching at Central Texas College. He's teaching computer science. Our boys wanted an education, and we wanted to see that they had one, but also we wanted to see that they had a fair education. I know recently in Oklahoma City, I had a most interesting experience. There was a little woman who had invited me up there, and she called a press conference in her home. Among other things, one day I spoke 7 times. By the end of the day, I was like a clock. I felt like I could never quite unwind. But I thought, well, that poor little woman, now you know there's nobody going to come out to hear me or even to interview me. What would be any use of calling a press conference? At 10 o'clock, there were 3 TV stations sent out their networks with all of their equipment, one set up outside, one in the living room, and one in the den, and the radio had his roving reporter. It was big news in Oklahoma City because they were having the fight of a century there. So it was big news. Every time someone turned on the TV or radio, there was something about Mrs. Gabler. But that's not the point. It's what I had to say that made it important. It was news. One of the newsmen was about the age of one of my sons. And he asked me, he said, and Mrs. Gabler says, I hate to ask you this, but says, this is the question I must ask you. He was given the question, I'm sure, before he left the office. He said, I'll have to ask you this question. He said, don't you feel that the child has a right to know some of the problems and know some of the things that are wrong? After all, there really are things wrong. I said, by all means. But I said, would you tell me why we have to put the emphasis on all that's wrong with this country? Isn't there anything right? I said, what would you keep living here for if everything was wrong? I said, let me make the point. I didn't ask you if you were married, but I assume that possibly you are. I said, how would you like the day you walked in, every afternoon you came home from your office, your wife started telling you, boy, your ears are too long, your nose is too short, I don't like the way you talk. Everything about you is wrong. I said, how long would you stay married? He said, you made your point. You see, today where we lose is we're too sweet and we're too good. Now you can be nice, but do it carefully. I told having appeared in so many hearings in Austin, it's quite interesting. I wished I had time to tell you some of the most interesting things and how the Lord works it to our advantage. Because you see, I pray, the one prayer that I pray the most is that I will never lose my temper in a hearing, because this is what they want. About 9 years ago, when I had first started going to the hearings, we had reviewed books about 2 years before I started going to the hearing. One of the board members, who was really a rough attorney, he was a leading attorney in one of our large cities in Houston, and he prided himself in knocking people down. That evidently was his job, and he loved it. And I almost felt that he hated himself. I knew he didn't like me. And he was always bugging me. So one day he reared back, and he had a room full, because it was always full at the hearings, if it wasn't, especially the publishers who would like to cut my throat anyway. So he reared back very nicely and said, Mrs. Gabler, suppose you tell me and this board just what qualifies you for us to listen to anything that you have to say. Well, you try that one for size. So I looked at him and I thought to myself, I said, Lord, if you ever wanted to help me, you better help me now, because I've got to have some good ones. Because I knew what I said to him would mean whether I ever was a chance to come back and what kind of a witness I would be before this man. And I also had to do it with courtesy. So I looked at him and I said, I have 3 good ones. Number 1, my children belong to me and my husband. They don't belong to you or the state yet. Number 2, my money pays for these textbooks. Number 3, we elect you to office. You come up with 3 better ones. To this day, that man never asked me what qualified me anymore. I have never been asked my qualifications. You know what he wanted, my long string of qualifications with degrees. And he knew I didn't have them. But I have common sense. I can read. It's just a pity they can't read. About 2 years ago, two of the publishers' representatives came up to me and said, Mrs. Gabler says, we want to tell you how much we appreciate you. And I said, uh-oh, I must not have one of your books. They said, you don't, and boy, do we feel honored. But I tell you, it's not all fun. It's interesting. But I'm doing it for one thing. If I were doing it for myself or for my husband, I'd quit today. But you see, I happen to have a reason for doing it. I happen to love my children, and I want to have an opportunity for my children and my grandchildren to have a future. There is no hope unless we give it to them. We must not discourage our young people. Even if I thought there were no hope, I would not give up. Because if you're not fighting, what would you do? Sit around and twiddle your thumbs? Just think now, if we weren't working in Texas, we'd have the worst of the books. You see, it was worth it. We win a little bit every year. We never lose it. We keep pushing in Texas till we've tried to make it fair. They know I intend to have it fair. I even threatened to carry the board to court one time, and I didn't have a dime. But I was hurt again. Because, you see, I happen to know they don't want to go to court. They couldn't afford it. Because they don't want to air their linens in public. Because, you see, the field of education is probably one of the dirtiest and the most expensive things that's going on today. In Texas alone, 1 year, we spent $27 million. Do you know what one of the publishers told the press this last year when he received the contract? One of the 5 publishers for the new social science studies, it was worth $2 million profit. You didn't realize what a business. They expected to make $3.5 million out of that $2 million profit. I tell you, it's big business, and I intend to hurt it for them. I don't know how many of you have looked at a world history. We were shocked at a world history in 1971. This is a global history of man. And I'll have to tell you for the first time that I honestly say that this book was written for President Nixon's trip to China. It's the most pro-Marxist book that I have ever picked up. It starts out, it sets its theme, is the world's major culture areas. Let me read you the major culture areas and see if you see something missing. The Soviet Union, Latin America, China, India, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East. Where's the United States? Did you know that we're no longer a major world culture area? It's real interesting. We wrote the publisher of the company, and by the way, it's here in Boston. We asked him, we dated our letter on February the 12th, 1971. We wrote to the vice president of the company, and we asked him, why is it that we had a 1962 edition of the Global History of Man, and the United States was number 1? And when we got to 70, it had been dropped. We asked him why. And he told us, yes, it had been dropped in the 1966 in the 6th revision. And the reason for that is the kids in the United States had already gotten too much American history, and you didn't need to take the world history to put it in. We wrote back and we said we'd like to know which history they got it in. We'd been reviewing it for 10 years and we hadn't found it. We wanted him to name the books. And this is part of his letter he wrote back to us. He said, they, the students, are given the objective facts from which they can form lasting and meaningful judgments. Now this is the best one. The syrupy emotionalism devoid of real facts and a willingness to admit shortcomings that characterized social science in the 50s and the 60s has contributed to the problem America faces today with a significant portion of its youth. In other words, what's wrong with America today is because they've had too much patriotism. I'll challenge anybody on that. I said, I don't believe it. I've read too many books, and we asked him to give the names of the books, and after that he wouldn't give any answers. But they did take the book in Texas because it seems today the trend is, well, we don't really have to pay any attention to him. I'll tell you what happened to the sales in just a moment. Let me read you just a little bit of the trend of this book on China alone. The Communist Army was not corrupt. Perhaps more important, the Communists were not corrupt. It was corruption that deprived the Chinese peasant of his property and his dignity. And the honesty that it was universally acknowledged to be a characteristic of the Chinese communist inevitably drew approval. Marxism was the wave of the future, and its adoption would put China at the head of the world history. Nationalist units, on the other hand, were permeated with corruption and were poorly led. Marxism turns the people toward a future of unlimited promise and an escalator to the stars. Now, I'm reading from the book. That's on page 444. To be sure, I always take the books with me. You see, it's real interesting. The thing that you hear the most when you challenge a textbook is you took it out of context. I said, don't tell me that. If I'm wrong, you better be able to prove it. I've got the book. You prove me wrong. They'll usually turn and walk off. You know why? I said, I'm doing you a favor by taking it out, because it's worse in the book. It ends with the future of China. Today, the communists have reunified the people and built a powerful state bent on achieving a century of progress in a few decades. We have seen some of the enormous difficulties they met in that ambitious task. Nowhere did they tell the student of the killing of millions of people. I don't call that progress. This particular book was adopted. We knew that every school in our great state would be studying from this book if we didn't put out a real concerted effort. We put the hardest effort that we ever had. I told the publisher, I said, you may get it adopted, but I'm going to do everything I can to keep you from selling it. Do you know how we came out in the state of Texas? We were on a talk program in San Antonio. I don't know how many of you have heard the Allendale talk show in San Antonio. It was heard all over the United States. He was quite well known. He was an old newsman. He also had written to the company and offered equal time to the publishing company. They accepted it. They flew their vice president down from Boston. Mr. Carroll was the guest on the Allendale program in following us. And Alan asked him, because on one of the pages in here, it has on just 2 written pages the word revolutionary 32 times. Alan asked him, Alan said, I'm a writer, and I happen to know, Mr. Carroll, that had to be done deliberately. It didn't just accidentally happen. Why? He said, I really don't know. This was on the radio program. Then, the next night, I called in to the program and I said, Alan, I sure wish you had asked him how many copies he sold in the state of Texas. He said, Norma, I did. Would you like to hear what he said? He said, our sales in Texas were very, very poor. In fact, we made almost no sales, and we give Mrs. Gabler the credit. But believe me, that isn't true, because anyone who's in the sales business know if you had all the money in the world and did all your advertising, the chance for somebody to read it and to do something about it is nothing. Believe me, it had to be the Lord, because Texas is too big for that. There are too many school districts. Now we have board members in our great state of Texas that write us and ask us, how do you rate your books? It was real interesting, and yet it rather disgusted me. We have a means of the state level, then down to the local level. We have a multiple choice in Texas, but the Texas schools can use nothing that has not been first state adopted. Then they have the choice of the 5, but only the 5 that has been state approved or state adopted. Then we come down to the local level, which they call the round robin for the publisher. He can come and give his big sale to the teachers locally. And it's so interesting to go down there because it's more interesting when they don't know me, because I go sit along with the rest of the teachers. Well, 3 of the publishers didn't know me, but 2 of them did. And after it was over, one of the publishers came up to me and said, Mrs. Gabler, said, me and my company want to thank you for helping us make our great sales in Texas and in Arkansas. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the fact that you rated us first. And I said, now, you know I think your book stinks. And he said, yeah, but that doesn't, just the fact that you rated us first, see, it happened to be the best of the worst. And yet he credited me to give it to selling his book. But people do respect us in Texas for only one thing. We've tried at all times to be honest and to be fair. We try to review a book fairly and never to go overboard, and not to review it on how we feel politically, but what that child will be studying, the attitude of the child. You remember when the child that is going to be using this book, he has very little knowledge of the subject. And when you review a book, you have to keep in mind of the age of the child that will be doing the studying from this book and his knowledge of the subject. Also, at times you're almost frustrated in knowing what really that the child will be having to study and what he will be doing. In the state of Texas, we've attempted many different subjects, and I say attempted because we're just 2 people. We have knowledge only because we've worked at it. We're just 2 people, but 2 people can accomplish something if you're willing to work at it. In English literature, a couple of years ago, I was appalled at the level we had reached. We had gone to little paperback books. And really, I'll be honest with you, many of the paperback books that were submitted for Texas, I would not have even had in my home. I would have hidden them under a bed. This particular little book is called People in Poetry. Now, these were submitted for 11th and 12th grades, and but they were only 9th grade reading level. They were written for the disadvantaged student. So we challenged them in Texas in saying, well, the disadvantaged student needs more than anybody else to be lifted out of the gutter. Why smear him in the gutter and then throw slop on him and then say you're trying to better the child? You can't do that. That does not better a child. Some of these stories were the most gruesome, the most horrible. Really, they were gutter level under the guise of education. And some of the poems you wouldn't believe. Let me read you 2 of the poems, or 3 of them. This is called Coolness. The plan to steal melons, that's forgotten too. How cool I feel. That's it. Nothing. Okay, this is Sudden Showers. Not even a hat, a cold rain falling on me. Tut tut, think of that. That's it. Here's another one. We real cool. We left school, we lurk late, we strike straight. We sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon. Boy, that's a hopelessness, isn't it? Here's another one, is the mailman. With your fist ablaze, with letters and colored stamps, beautiful mailman. Now you say, well now that doesn't mean very much. Let me show you how, and then I also have the teachers. By the way, don't depend on reading your child's textbook. Also demand that you look at how the teacher's going to teach that book. You would be surprised what that teacher gets out of that. Let me give you an idea of how the teacher, just out of that little mailman that I just read you, they have 5 lessons they get out of that. And it's called encounters. Encounters, and she puts on the board an introduction, a clash, a confrontation, and an encounter. And it says an introduction is formal. It is seldom exciting. The people may not have very strong feelings. They may feel nervous, stiff, or bored. A confrontation may be a demonstration, political, racial in nature, down to a clash. In other words, actually get down to fighting. Now, how could you get that out of there? It's ridiculous. Then you wonder what's happened to education? I can tell you what's happened to your child. He is a victim in the classroom. He has no choice. I feel honestly in my heart, and after reading the books this year, the only real hope for this nation is to either keep your children at home or teach them in a Christian, have them sent to a Christian school. There's no hope in a public school. This same Macmillan's Gateway literature, I think probably the most frustrating thing and certainly the most heartbreaking thing is some of the things that the teacher was told that she must do in teaching this book. And it's honestly unbelievable because a teacher is told that she cannot teach any morals, but she's given instruction to teach days and many lessons on a law-breaking, civil disobedience, and how to have direct action. Would you believe she even is told to tell the students to break them up in groups and to give them the different groups things? And one of the groups she is told to how to have direct action, how they can have marches, sit-ins, and boycotts. If they don't like what's going on in school, it even tells them how they can go before the school board and have sit-downs in the classrooms. They seem to have done a good job, haven't they? This is down in the public schools in the state of Texas. Honestly, the teacher is told she can teach rebellion, but she cannot teach any morals. What has happened to a Christian nation, I can tell you why. We as Christians have sat back and let everybody else do teaching our children. We have not done well. Every generation must hand down to the next one his heritage. We have done a very miserable job. You see, I happen to have boys that are in the 20 age group. What has happened in 20 years? We have not handed down our great heritage. This was our responsibility, moms and dads. It wasn't your neighbors, and it wasn't the school. I know I'm talking to groups of people that don't, but whenever your neighbors discuss something, ask them, when was the last time you told your son or your daughter of what it was like or what it means to live in America? Are you proud of it? Or are you ashamed of it? That's what it boils down to. We must teach our children their heritage. Nobody else cares. This is what makes the difference. This particular English book, another point of it, is each of the titles of the books, they have very different titles. One of them is Something Strange, and believe me, it is. Every book, let me give you just a little bit of some of the stories. The name of the first story is The Jam. The characters are dope addicts. The Hitchhiker is next, and it has an identical climax. Both are written to horrify. The Birds was made into a Hitchcock movie, so is well known. But in reading this story and this book, it has so much more blood and gruesome details that the reader feels that he needs to go out and take a bath. Zero leaves the impression that it is normal for children to hate their parents and for parents to be indifferent to their children. In the teacher's manual, on a lesson called Suspension and Disbelief, let me quote a little bit of it. The Snake Woman is a folktale horror story that involves a boy being killed by a woman who is really a snake. The Wish is a modern horror story concerning a boy who imagines the patterns of a rug to be wild animals, which eventually comes out and devours him. Then the teacher is told to tell the student this. Tell the students that people can enjoy being frightened in a situation where there is no real danger to them. Being frightened can be thrilling, even pleasurable. Perhaps we may secretly wish to be punished. Then you wonder what's happening to your children? This is in English. But then we come along to the new social science studies. I'd like to spend the last part of my talk on just a little bit of the new trend in education. And believe you, me, we are going a long way. You will not believe it. You heard Mr. Steinbacher the other day refer to, he calls it MACOS, I call it MACOS. Now that happens to stand for Man, a Course of Study. This particular series, it's called the New Social Science Studies. You know, for years we had history, geography, and the good old subjects that all children should be taught in a classroom. But that's the old thing. Then we went to the social studies. Now we've gone to the social science studies. These happen to be written by behavioral scientists. Their one aim is not to educate your child, but to change his behavior, to reprogram his thinking, to remove all the thoughts of the things that he had and change it completely with a complete new thinking. And they're doing a good job of it. Those who write the books say that they've started too late. They should not have waited till they get up in junior high and high school. We should get the child before he starts to school. Because you see, a little child is willing to learn anything. He can do a good job of it. So now the new trend is, at an early age, at the beginning of 5 and 6, is to tell the child to take him away from all the things that once was held dear in this great country. The love of a parent, the love of his country, and the respect for morals and religious heritage. That is going to be changed. One of the writers of one of this series that we reviewed feels that a child comes to school mentally ill, and that he will not be mentally well until he has rejected all parental authority, all morals, all love for his country, and all religious heritage. Then he is considered mentally healthy. You see the trend that we've gone today? Why did we do this? It's because we, as parents, have sat back and done nothing. Parents today have been too busy. I was asking our young son, he traveled with me so much, I said, Don, what is really wrong with the young kids? Because he also worked at the Holiday Inn and he talked to people. And he liked people. He happened to have a real love for people. He said, Mother, I think more than anything else, in talking to my friends, is that they want to feel really needed and really wanted. Think about that. And he said, Mother, this does not mean giving them everything. He said, I've had friends that say, I wish my mother and dad cared enough for me to say no. We've forgotten the word. As I say, we used Dr. Spock's book. I didn't. I felt like that if my children needed to be punished, I'd do like they did when I grew up. If you need to be punished, there's nothing wrong with a stick. It just you don't bruise them, but you let them know you mean it. You have your rules and you stick to it. Telling a child no doesn't hurt them. I don't have to tell you what's happened to Dr. Spock's kids. They're out revolting in the streets today, and he's leading them. A child needs to be told no. I was talking to a beautiful young girl in Phoenix a couple of years ago, and I asked her to have lunch with me. She was out of school from Denver because their schools had been closed because of riots. And she told me something I don't think I'll ever forget. She said, Miss Gabler, I'm so glad you asked me to eat lunch with you. She said, could I tell you something? Would you like to know what it's like to have taken dope? She told me of some of her experiences, and she said, you know where it came from? Because my mother and dad never knew where I was and really didn't care. They felt that since I was 12 years old that I could make up my own mind. How many of you heard this today? Let's let the children make up their own mind. You know what she told me? She said I would have given anything in the world if my mother and dad had cared enough to know where I was or what I was doing. She said I was not old enough to know when I should come in. A young person doesn't know this. And she said today I would be a dope addict if I had not gone to Billy James Harga's summit. She said I found Christ, and she said that made the difference in my life, and it happened before it was too late. This little Makos book, real quickly, let me read you just a little bit of a horror story. This is The Many Lives of Kiviak. This little guy is quite a guy. He mates with all kinds of animals, and I'm sorry if that's just the way it is. There are always animals in human form. This is how low we can get. He had gone and traveled from place to place. His old parents were dead. By the way, all of these writers have a thing against old people. I feel sorry for the older people, and I'm fast getting that way, because they have no use for you. There is no need for you. In fact, the author of this series, just tell you the type of mind he has, that when he first wrote the series, Jerome Bruner, it said that the little fifth graders, and this is written for fifth grade, became very disturbed and very upset over killing animals for other than peaceful purposes or useful purposes for eating. This is if they were gouging eyeballs and things like this, and the children became very upset. So he decided, rather than keep them upset, do you know what he would do? They would role play and play act, leaving grandparents to die because they were too old to be of any use anyway. That isn't funny, is it? But this is what's happening. This is Kiviak teaches the wolves to hunt caribou. He'd gone on to another place, and soon he came to a house where a mother and daughter lived. And they were big and strong. They were wolves in human form. He stayed with them and decided he would take the daughter for his wife. Then he decided he would teach him how to hunt caribou. And then it says, as time went on, the old woman, this is the mother, grew angry, for she too wanted a husband. She envied her daughter more and more until one day, when Kiviak was out hunting caribou, she killed her own daughter. She pulled the young, smooth skin from her daughter's face and hands, and with it she covered her wrinkled old face and her bony hands. She wanted Kiviak for her husband. Can you imagine teaching a 10-year-old child for a mother to kill her own daughter, and not only kill her, but to skin her? You ask what's happening to a nation, I'll tell you what's happening to a nation. You'd better start doing something about it while you've got time. The children still belong to you, and another year or two, at the rate we're going, they won't belong to you. There's inexcusable to use this for education. Another one of the little books on firm ice. This is all part of the Makel's, the Mana course of study. This particular one is entitled, When a Dog is Crazy. When a dog is crazy, you kill him. Guess what you do when a man is crazy? You kill him. The sick part of this is that they got together when one of the men went crazy. They got together and had their little meeting. Now, everything is done in a group. The child studying the new social studies program will not be an individual. Everything must be done in a group. And you will do whatever the group decides, whether you like it or not. That is the way your child will be taught from the new program that is up in our Texas, particularly in our schools, and it's getting across this great land. The Eskimos got together and they had a meeting, and they decided that for the best and for the best thing for the whole group was that he had to be killed. You know who they decided to kill him? The man's own brother. So the brother went to his brother, and he said, I guess you know they have decided that you must be killed. He said, but I don't like to be hurt. He said, well, we'll decide which. They went into great detail. We'll decide which is the easiest, which will kill you the quickest and hurt the least. Now, you can imagine, we're talking about 10-year-old children. So they decided they'd choke him to death. And it goes into detail. It tells how they do it, getting the string and the everything. But I think the story that followed it disturbed me the most. The next was followed by a story of life as it used to be. It seems the man that was killed had a young son, about 10 years old. This little boy loved his daddy, and he was grieving over him, and it shows a picture of a bowed head. This little boy, he cried all the time, so they became worried about him. And so finally the granddaddy took him out on a little hunting trip, and he said, now, son, it was for the good of everybody that your dad was killed. Therefore, you should not cry or grieve. Sing a song for joy. Do you realize the trend? I don't know how many of you have heard the talks. I'm sure you have. I was thinking of Jerry Rubin said, or Abby Hoffman, until you're ready to kill your own mother and dad, you're not ready for the revolution. We're teaching a child in school that he can murder his own parents and laugh about it. It's the good of everybody. We cannot afford this in this great land of ours. We must not let this happen. They have taken the new trend in education is to put you no more than an animal. We term it animalizing human beings. You're no more than an animal. There's pictures in one of the books that shows the pictures of people, the child. A child eats, a dog eats. Children run, horses run. Men fight, animals fight. A mother loves its baby just as a cat loves its kittens. I'll challenge anybody on that. No cat can love a child like a mother can love her baby. This makes me tired, and yet we're the ones that sit back and let this happen. One other little point, in the Makos, to me it's all alike. There's another story about a little orphan girl who was left an orphan, and when the Eskimos picked up camp to go to the next hunting ground, the little girl didn't want to be left behind, and they felt like they couldn't take her. So when they got in their boats to push out to sea, she swam out and caught a hold of the boat. What they did, they took a knife and chopped her fingers off and let her fall into the water. Now that's not just in Makos. Take a look at Paul Brandwine's series, the Harcourt series. You'll find the identical same story in the 5th grade. She just has a different name. She became she became the mother of all the whales, and her fingers became the seals. It's a real good lesson on evolution. Also, here is about the old grandmother. I took the old woman on the ice today. It was his own mother that he had driven out and set down at sea to freeze to death. He was fond of her, he explained. He had always had been kind to her, but she was too old, and she was no longer good for anything. So blind, she couldn't even find the porch to crawl into the igloo. So on the day of a blizzard, the whole family agreeing, he had taken her out, and they had struck camp and gone off, leaving her to die. They picked a blizzard so she'd die quicker. If you don't believe me, take a look when you come by our booth and take a look at some of the textbooks. I don't know if many of you know it or not. Maybe some of you do. The hearings are not easy. This past year was particularly hard for us. You see, last August the 21st, our middle son, Paul, was married. We were on a mountaintop. I don't think we've ever been happier. 2 nights later, our young son, 20 years old, was killed in an automobile accident. 3 weeks later, the hearings were in Austin. You see, they thought I wouldn't be there. But I had to go. And that's not easy. You see, Don traveled with me. He was quite a guy. I say little guy. He was 6'4". We were very proud of him. And he respected us. But you see, more than anything else, I'm a Christian. And my husband and I tried to teach our boys there was a living God. And I feel sorry for those who have no living God. There is no man can take away the hurt, but God can do it. And let me tell you something. You can spend a lot of time on a lot of things, but there is nothing more important than teaching your child there is a living God. You see, the difference is this. Each time I speak, I don't think it would be right for his memory not to tell you that he did love the Lord. He's in heaven. I know that. If I did not know that I would see him again, I'd quit today. Also, it's a hard road. But you see, what we're doing is to give another child a chance. As I was telling this story, I said, if we had Don back, I can think of nothing that we could do for him any different. We loved him when we had him. We appreciated him. I have no regrets, except we miss him. As I was telling this story in the Fort Worth area about 3 months ago, I said, you see, I know that Don is with the Lord, but I said today it would break my heart if I had raised a son and he had turned off everything, had gone out on the way out hippie movements. I said he would have been alive, but I would have lost him. My heart would have broken far more than it breaks today. And did you know a mother started crying? And she said, Mrs. Gabler, that's what happened to me. I have a 30-year-old son. Oh, he's alive, but I've lost him. You see, we forget the important things in life. Do you really love your children? If you love them, then listen to what they're talking about. Most of our young people today, the reason we don't understand them is they're taught a different language. We found in one of the English books, they use the word judgment words. Did you know a judgment word is termed a liar? When you say that somebody's lying, you mean a liar. But they're saying, yeah, he's a liar, so what? Because, see, they have a different term. They're speaking a different language. Also, our young people today are taught likenesses and differences. And they play up how much we are alike, not how much we're different. When Nixon went to China, he talked of our shared beliefs and values. In other words, he was only going to discuss how much we were alike, all the things that we had in common, the things that how much that we were alike, not how much we were different. This is what's happening in our great land. We as parents have a right to our children. Take your right and don't lose it, because if you don't care, nobody else does. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gabler. I don't know of any person who can tell the story better than she can. And of course, that's what's the trouble with our country today. We don't care, because if we really cared, we'd do something. And I often wondered through the years, what have the communists and the infiltrators and Council on Foreign Relations and those people who are working to destroy our country and our civilization, what have they, and destroy God, what kind of power have they got that our people are willing to let them take over? Now, I know that probably 95% of our people are good people, but it's just absolutely appalling that we don't care. And how could the schools and the textbooks and the colleges and all this turn out the kind of creatures they're turning out? Do you know that there's hardly a college in the United States the boys and girls don't sleep together? Now, I think that's appalling. The only thing I can think of is the colleges are running brothels and houses of prostitution, because I can't imagine any one of you people here having boys and girls in your home and you'd allow them to go upstairs to bed. And here we're paying thousands upon thousands of dollars for those things to happen to our children. I don't know what's the matter with our people. I can't possibly imagine. And the religious schools, religious colleges, it's really appalling. It's almost enough, it's hard to keep your sanity. Well, thank you, Mrs. Gabler.